Good evening. The webinar will begin in just a moment. Thanks for joining us, Destiny. I'm going to turn your camera off briefly and we'll bring you right back on as we get to you. Okay, good evening and welcome to ReCenter Indiana's second Zoom rally leading up to the November general election. Thank you for joining us. My name is Adrienne Slash. I'm a lifelong Republican and I have the honor of leading ReCenter Indiana's Political Action Committee. Tonight, we're going to hear from two exceptionally qualified candidates who are running to break the grip of one-party government in Indiana. Jennifer McCormick, herself a former Republican, is the Democratic nominee for governor, and Destiny Wells is the Democratic nominee for Indiana Attorney General. ReCenter Indiana is a bipartisan PAC, but increasingly, the party in control of our state government demonstrates that it doesn't care what most Hoosiers think. A few evenings ago, we showcased 4 candidates who stood in good chance of helping us to break the supermajority in the House of Representatives. However, some districts have been rigged to make sure that there's no meaningful contest. Tonight, our focus is on Statehouse races, where literally every vote counts. First, we'll hear from a few words from Don Knievel, who leads ReCenter Indiana Incorporated. Then Destiny Wells, who will talk about why she's running for Attorney General. After that, Jennifer McCormick will make her case for electing her as Indiana's first woman governor. If you have a question for either candidate, please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click the Q&A tab. While we may not get to all of your questions, we'll try to do our best to get some of them incorporated. If you're looking for the Q&A button, it's next to the chat button in the lower portion of your screen. We're recording the candidates. Those of you in the audience are not being recorded. Sit back and relax. Let's get started, Don.
Thanks, Adrienne. Excuse me. I'm Don Knievel. I'm a Democrat. As you heard, I'm the president of ReCenter Indiana, Inc., the educational arm of ReCenter Indiana. ReCenter Indiana, as Adrienne said, is a bipartisan organization formed 2 years ago to move Indiana politics and rhetoric closer to the center, where most Hoosiers are. One of our goals is to recenter the Indiana Statehouse. Our earlier rallies focused on breaking the supermajority in the Indiana House of Representatives, which allows the Republicans in the legislature to ignore the wishes of the majority of Hoosiers. But it's also our goal, as Adrienne said, to end single-party rule in Indiana, which former Governor Mitch Daniels recently noted is bad for any government, as he recognized one-party rule stifles innovation, which in turn leads to a weaker economic future for everyone. That view is endorsed by Michael Hicks, a conservative Ball State professor, who's concluded that Indiana's educational policies enacted by Republicans over Democratic objections have the potential of making our state poor. Our first guest tonight, who is seeking to eliminate one-party rule, is Destiny Wells. Destiny is an attorney who grew up in Morgan County. She attended Indiana University as a first-generation college student and went on to law school. At the age of 19, she enlisted in the Indiana National Guard. She has served in the military now for over 20 years, including a combat tour in Afghanistan. She is currently Lieutenant Governor in the U.S. Army Reserve. Destiny has worked at all levels of our government, local, state, federal, and the multinational level with NATO. As an attorney, she has served as the Associate Corporation Counsel for the City of Indianapolis and Marion County, as Deputy Attorney General for the state of Indiana. She is running for Indiana Attorney General. Destiny, thank you for joining us.
Destiny, please join us with your camera on.
I can't.
Of course.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, good. those Zoom functionalities. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. As Dawn introduced me, my name is Destiny. I am running for Indiana Attorney General. Some of you have gotten to know me over the years. I'm also a deputy chair in the Indiana Democratic Party, and I ran for Secretary of State. And I was so happy to have ReCenter's support in that race for secretary. Actually, my start with Indiana government, however, was in the Indiana Attorney General's office. And if we want to talk about bipartisan beginnings, I started working there under Curtis Hill, who was a Republican. And it was in that office that I realized that I wanted to run for that office later, and I would be running as a Democrat. So a little bit about my start and why ReCenter has always appealed to me. You know, I am actually a Republican family's kid, Republican farmer. My mom's side is a lot of union, however, they vote Republican. And so I was a little bit, the black sheep who went off to Indiana University and then had joined the Army National Guard. And really, when I went to law school, 2008 was the year that Obama had gotten elected, right, for president. And that really framed my understanding of the law and then also my partisan leanings. I like to give some anecdotal evidence, that I came to age during Iraq, during 9/11, and I did not really see a place for me in Republican politics. And then I began to learn the law, and I served in the Department of Defense when we fully integrated women, right? I saw more equity under a Democratic administration, but I try to be really mindful that those politics framed how I see the world, and that not necessarily do everybody's politics or historical references, their lens, align with mine. And so I try to be very understanding that in that regard. And I have taken with me what I've learned in the military, right? So you in the military, some of us, we go back and forth. Some general officers don't even vote for president, right? They don't want to vote for the commander in chief that will lead them. But we see a military that is a quilt of diversity, that is a big reflection of the United States, a bit of a microcosm. And so I've had this historical journey up until this point, 21 years later in the military, where I have served with a very diverse force. And I understand that because we are a diverse force, we are a stronger force. And that is really what roots my value system and how I also approach politics. I like to say I did, in fact, first vote for Bush, but I voted for Bush because my parents, they voted for Bush and before, and that's just how I grew up. And it was not until I got out in the world and I started to frame my own thinking that I realized that my identity was more on the left side of the aisle. But like I said, I never forget where I came from, and I'm obviously very cognizant that I now live in Indiana. And if I want to get anything accomplished running as a Democrat, I need to be very open-minded. So I decided I would run for Attorney General. I referenced I had been an attorney in the AG's office before. I started the week I found out I was pregnant. And I also got to the AG's office when Curtis Hill was getting in some hot water, right, in his dealings with women at a political function. And I saw an office too. I had just gotten home from Afghanistan. It was a little bit after a year of being home that I went to work there. And I was really wanting to scratch that itch of government service. And that's kind of what had led me to the office. But I immediately noticed that state government in Indiana ran a little bit differently than what I had experienced at the federal level. And so I wanted to take the experience that I had been given as a benefactor of many of your tax dollars in uniform to the state of Indiana. And I got involved in Democratic politics. I was an outsider. I had some people that helped me get a little bit of a head start in that arena, and I could break through. And I am a firm believer that we need to work on our barriers of entry to politics in both parties. Because the barrier can be quite high and quite frustrating. And I think we keep out a lot of talent and a lot of new ideas. And so I kind of went through that I will say challenge of getting to learn Indiana politics and the arena that I was trying to operate in. And so I ended up, like I said, running for Secretary of State, got my feet wet, figured out a lot of the challenges across the state. And three big things I walked away from 22 knowing, and that I think are really issues that an organization like ReCenter should want to try to wrap our arms around is three things. So one was the money, right? And when I was asked to run for Attorney General, my first rebuttal was, can you find somebody who has a lot of money? Somebody that in politics we now call a self-funder. And if you look at Indiana politics, you will see a lot of self-funders who are elected. So it was the money. And then on election night, I realized it was also voter turnout. In 22, we ran in Indiana, a purple state with a voter turnout problem, right? Not red, not blue, purple. And we were 50th in the nation in voter turnout in 22. And then the third thing was, and Indiana is only one of 7 states. Indiana is a very, very hard board to play on politically if you are anything but other than a Republican. It really is. And one of those things is that we have straight ticket voting. And so how do you get Hoosiers who really the Statehouse, the supermajority Republican Statehouse, really does accommodate our low information voters. What do I mean by that? I mean, you don't really need to know anything when you walk in the booth, right? You can just pull your party and walk right back out. And we deal with that in Indiana, especially these last years of a very polarized electorate. So we have those issues to deal with. So when we decided that I was going to run for Attorney General, we wanted to make sure that our platform spoke to both sides of the aisle. And we have framed this as a race to be the people's attorney. We have not had a Democratic Attorney General since before issues or reframing of our legal system like right to work. So we have not reimagined what the office can do for our middle class Hoosiers. So we want to do things like have a workers' rights division. We also want to take the AG's office. It's gotten so hyper partisan. I like to say the last technocrat that was in the AG's office left around 2016. And so what we've seen is it's become very partisan, and Todd Rokita is using his authority over medical licensing to inflict his political agenda really on women's reproductive health care. And we saw that especially in the summer of 22 when he personally attacked, and I do say attacked because the Indiana Disciplinary Court agreed, Disciplinary Commission agreed, when he attacked an abortion care provider, Dr. Caitlin Bernard, when she decided to publicly tell the story of the 10-year-old rape victim who came from Ohio to get medical care. And so we have that going on. We also have the AG encroaching on education. The Department of Ed is not really a client of the Attorney General, but he has a lot of opinions about what should be going on, so much so that he's even created a website, right, for Eyes on Education. And really just what we're seeing come out of that office. And what's important for this organization, ReCenter Indiana, is we are seeing some very, very zealously partisan elected officials that have at the end of the day often come out of Republican primaries and been really pushed to the right, like even the AG is very pushed to the right coming out of a convention, just like sometimes a Democratic candidate is pushed to the left because your audience is your own party. But we have seen that take over the office and leave what I like to call what should be a technocratic office behind. So we're saying that when we are elected, when I'm elected to Indiana Attorney General and you walk in that office, You won't know the politics of the office. You will just know they are really great attorneys who are passionate about their craft and who want to best serve their clients, whether that be the state of Indiana, the Hoosier citizenry, or advising the legislature. Those are three big areas that the AG has an impact on. And so that is our prerogative in running for Indiana Attorney General. And we know it very much aligns with the mission of ReCenter Indiana.
Thank you so much for your intro tonight, and we're really glad that you're here with us. We are a few moments away from Jennifer McCormick being able to join us. Would you mind answering a couple of questions we have in the chat?
Absolutely.
Sure. So the first question comes to us, and it says, how will the Office of Attorney General change if Destiny is elected to replace Todd Rokita?
Right. Well, we like to say what we're not going to do first, right? So we're going to make sure that we're not in the classrooms, pitting, like I said, preying on the vulnerabilities of parents, right? Their fears about how their children are educated. And we're not going to be exploiting that and turning neighbor against neighbor. And that really is, if you think about local communities, parent against teacher, people who know each other, but yet are at odds because politics has infiltrated a space that should be safe and about a thriving education for children. So we're going to get out of the classroom. We're going to get out of doctors' offices. Now, there is a reason that the AG is involved in licensing, and there is oversight there, but we should not be abusing it. And what we see Todd doing is abusing it so much that he's chilling care, right? I talked to an OBGYN yesterday. I talked to her. I just so happened to run into her father later that night in Kokomo, and he told me that his daughter will probably leave Indiana ultimately because she just doesn't feel like she can do her job. That has so many second and third order effects. It's not just about abortion. Then it becomes a very opaque, vague, we don't know, the doctors don't know their right and left limits, and we see poor care when it comes to just miscarriages. And then also we see recruitment issues. We see an exodus of providers. In Indiana, we are losing some of our best and brightest. We already have medical care deserts. We already have reproductive health care deserts. And we have specific examples of that happening. So we want to make sure that we get out of that fight. And then we want to make sure that we also remove ourselves from any friend of the court briefs nationally that don't align with just really great values out of the AG's office. We see a lot of that partisan fighting. I like to say, hey, if Todd Rokita, if it's Todd, you'll see him on a gas pot, or you'll see him on climate. Excuse me, I've been doing this a little too long. You'll see him on climate policy in California. You'll see him on a pipeline in Montana. You'll see him in court on border policy. And heck, your tax dollars will even be paying for a Trump rally on the way home. And that has in fact happened. So we want to shore up to some of the spending. We want to not turn a blind eye to Medicare fraud. There is a $700 million Medicare fraud whistleblower claim right now that the AG's office decided to not engage. The AG's office, in fact, has a Medicare fraud protection unit. And then, but first and foremost, with my Army hat on, we want to rebuild the culture and the climate of the office. We have seen an exodus of institutional knowledge. Previously working there, very few deputies still work there. It got to the point where lawyers were so uncomfortable, they didn't even want to put their name on pleadings because they were so political. And they didn't believe in the legal argumentation even of those pleadings. So we have to make sure that we put a lot of effort in recruiting some great civil servants back to the office so that they are proud to serve there. And we rebuild some of this state, muscle that we used to have. I talked to former Attorney General Pam Carter's son last night, and he was talking about how the Indiana AG's office had all the best briefs in the 90s. I don't think we're not there right now, and we want to try to get back there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And we have one other question that came in while you were speaking, if you don't mind answering it. Are there any strategies that you're finding that seem to be working to influence Republican voters to consider voting for Democrats?
I speak a lot anecdotally about being a Republican farmer's kid. And I talk about how the Republican Party left my parents. My parents didn't leave it. I try to speak anecdotally about one's own children in care or their senior parents in care. I just, I think the most effective thing I have found, and I feel like I'm pretty okay reading the room at this point when I walk into it, is I just have to put my finger on how do I meet these people where they are. And, maybe sometimes if I walk into a room and it's full of seniors, I remember this happened up north at a county meeting and everybody had gray hair. Okay. So I didn't necessarily talk about abortion. I talked about the healthcare deserts and how it affects their wait times and waiting to get into the doctor's office. We did a lot of polling. I saw Jennifer just hopped on, and we really wanted to hone in on what issues we needed to be talking about to meet Hoosiers where they are. And we found, like, for youth, it's housing. For white men, overwhelmingly, it's their taxes. They don't want their tax money misused. For women under 50, it is abortion care because it's indicative of how they see themselves in society. And so we do a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that we are meeting those Republican voters where they are. And I will tell you, we just polled this past September, and we saw that even on an initial ballot where Republicans we were peeling them off 1 out of 10, that we're up on independents 19, 20 points. So what we're doing, we believe, is effective.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for your opening and taking those 2 questions while we were awaiting our other candidate to join us. We will hear more from Destiny Wells in just a moment. Now I'd like to introduce Jennifer McCormick. Jennifer McCormick is a lifelong educator and multi-generational Hoosier from Newcastle. She has spent decades serving Indiana as a teacher, principal, and most recently, state superintendent of public education. While serving as a local school superintendent in Delaware County, Jennifer fought to protect local control of school districts to ensure that parents, teachers, and administrators could make the best decisions for their children. As state superintendent, she was a powerful advocate for teachers and students, ensuring that they had the resources they needed to succeed. At the same time, she insisted on protecting the taxpayer dollar by demanding transparency and fiscal accountability. Jennifer, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. We just got back from Scott County, so it has been a rainy day, but it's been a good day. So I am Jennifer McCormick. I so appreciate this opportunity to speak with all of you, and some of you I have met. It's been a busy campaign time. I know we're down to 37 days. People are really excited. We have had several town halls across the state of Indiana, and what I love about our campaign is we are filling those rooms, standing room only, with Republicans and Democrats and independents, and they're ready to go. I keep telling people we're seeing a very big difference in what I saw in 2016 when I did run as a Republican. I saw a lot of complacency driving that election, and it was just different. This is urgency and energy coming together, and there's no other better way to explain it than that. And so it has been quite amazing, the response that we have received. I know Destiny mentioned the polls. We have looked really good. The Democratic Governors Association is hanging in there with us as well. They just did their own poll, an independent poll, so that they wanted to see, they wanted a little bit to talk to their donors about, and we looked really, really good in that too. So we're within 2 to 3. We're right in that statistical error place, like that statistical tie. And so we feel really good about where we are going into this final stretch of 37 days. We are polling so many moderate Republicans, crazy enough. We've talked to also some Trump supporters that are supporting us because they are related to a teacher, or they have talked to some women, and it's just crazy, the conversations we're having. But also we've talked to a lot of independents that are trying to find a home this year, and then Democrats are clearly fired up, which we need them to vote. Our message has been very much about common sense and returning that balance to the state house. Like so many Hoosiers that I talk to, we don't like extremism, and I refuse to turn Indiana over to extremism. That's not who we are. That's not who we've been. Hopefully that's not who we will become. I'm paying attention to the national stage, and I've been in those conversations where people are also paying attention to Mike Braun and Micah Beckwith, and they're like, you are going to be the North Carolina. And I said, I hope we're the North Carolina in that. The Democratic candidates are doing very, very well there right now, but they also are paying attention to the Republican candidates who just look too extreme. We have been staying true to our message of restoring reproductive rights and freedoms for women, which for over 60% of Hoosiers, they are with us on that. It even goes up higher when you look at birth control and IVF, and also going back to the standards of Roe. Women want choices, and most Hoosiers trust women, and most Hoosiers trust their healthcare providers. We are also talking about access to affordable health care, which I know Destiny is also talking about. It's incredibly important that Hoosiers have access to care. A third of our counties don't have OBGYNs, and 25% do not have pediatricians, and it's very difficult to find nurses still, and anything from anesthesiologists and some other specialists. It's just a crisis across the state of Indiana. So making sure we have access to affordable care. We're obviously incredibly expensive in the state of Indiana, and a lot of people are talking about we're one of the highest states in healthcare debt. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens when you have an imbalance at the state house. And so the healthcare piece has been one of our biggest critical pieces to bring people together in our campaign to say we're ready for change. The second one is education. We still have 90% of our families that are big public education supporters. And although all of us are big education supporters, and we are a big choice state, what I'm quickly finding when you have that imbalance is we are a school choice, not a state, not a parent choice state. And there is a big difference. And so making sure that we are focusing on education, not just K-12, but also 0 to 5, as I would argue that 0 to 3 space right now, whatever state gets that right is going to be in really good shape, because we have huge language concerns coming at us in that K-12 space right now with our youngest of youngest. And also we're a state that doesn't have childcare, that we need it to the degree we do. And, that's quite an investment, not just in education, but in our workplace. Lack of universal pre-K still in the state of Indiana, which is unacceptable. And then K-12 and post-high school with the new graduation requirements coming out that, again, are a reflection of extremism. It does us no good. Finally, our university presidents came out and said, try again. So we'll see what happens. This election's critical into seeing where that lands. But education is our second piece of the platform. So we have healthcare, we have education. And then the third one that is very hard for any Hoosier to argue is we need our wages to go up. We are 47th in the nation in annual wage growth, but that is at a time where, our utility cost, our healthcare cost, our gas, our groceries, everything's going up, and except for our wages. And, housing is incredibly expensive right now, whether you're a homeowner or a renter. Property taxes are, continuing to climb. And so all of those things that are going up, people are saying, how is it that these other states are doing it? And I said, yes, they're going up as well, but their wages are going up, and it reflects that balance. But again, that is a reflection of a one-party rule at the state house for far too long. And so bringing some of that balance back to the state house, bringing that back with some common sense, most Hoosiers are ready for that change and understand the importance of it. The other piece of it that, as I travel the state, that I hear so much about are environmental issues. And, prior to that, a lot of Republicans really shy away from talking about that. But I will say more and more now are very concerned, particularly about our water. They're concerned about the LEAP project. They're concerned about phase 1 and phase 2, and what that does to the different counties. And, it's not just about supply, but it's about that discharge and our soil being compromised. So a lot of conversation there. wetland conversation, our air quality. We are one of the few states not in the Climate Alliance. It's a bipartisan effort. Again, the lack of willingness for Indiana to play nice on that national platform just does not go well. So making sure that we are being a good partner in the Climate Alliance. We do not have a water management plan. Mitch Daniels made some great strides when he was governor with the water shortage plan with the help of Purdue. And, Mike Pence took that away. And so we're just kind of floundering. And again, I think that's because we don't see people in the center, and we see them going on those extreme fringes, which has not served our state well. Our statistics across the board, whether you talk about education or whether you talk about quality of place, so that we're 47th in the nation, or our wages, or our healthcare costs. I mean, they're going in the wrong direction. And so, yes, we are we have some good things going, and I'm incredibly proud to be in Indiana, as many of you are on this call, but we need to just bring things back to that balance and bring back some common sense. So that's exactly what our campaign is doing. That is why we're pulling such amazing bipartisan support in donations, in volunteerism. And a lot of people that have told me, hey, I already voted, I sent in my ballot and you got my vote. I've had a lot of big time Republicans call that say, I'm going to help you out either financially or with connections. And so it's been, extremely humbling, but it also too shows the urgency that Hoosiers are feeling to get that change made. So I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself and tell you about my platform. It truly is, we're going to get this done.
Thank you so much. And thank you for just your thoughtful responses to our questions. At this time, we're going to make a little bit of a shift, and I'm going to ask Destiny Wells to join us back on screen now that we have heard from both of you individually. We're going to have a brief conversation with the two of you together. These questions have been provided by members of the ReCenter Indiana Political Action Committee, and some questions may overlap with something that you've already answered. I'm also, for those of you who have submitted questions, I'm going to do my very best to weave these answers in as best as possible, or the questions in as best as possible. To begin, since Destiny so nicely answered some questions right after she spoke, at this time, I'll start with the first question for you, Jennifer. By far, the biggest share of our state taxpayer dollars goes to education, the field to which you have devoted your career. Because of the expansion of Indiana's school vouchers system, private schools educate only 7% of Hoosier students, but receive 36% of state tax dollars for elementary and high school. That sounds lopsided and unfair. Is it? And if so, what would you do about it?
Yeah, right now, Indiana, we have spent $1.6 billion on privatization efforts, and we have enough trend data now to show the lack of results that were promised from the program. And so the amount of money is a concern, but the results that are coming in from the trend data now are very concerning. I know that they have signaled, because of the one-party rule, that they're getting ready to do universal vouchers, which in other states has been very costly and ineffective, but yet we're not willing to learn from those states. So that's concerning. The other piece of it is, if we're going to have public dollars go into any school in Indiana, I feel like the playing field in accountability and transparency should be the same. So if you're taking public dollars, the admissions should look the same. The services that you're responsible to render to kids who need it and deserve it should look the same. The accountability for the dollars in making sure that schools are indeed, that they have the credentials to deliver what they're supposed to for a diploma are there, which people take for granted. The other thing that I don't think that people are aware of, and this happens when you have a one-party rule, and it's happened in some other states, The private schools that most people think about are some of those very high performing, like Burbuff and Cathedral, Modern Days of Evansville. You know, there are some really good ones. And some of those do take vouchers, some do not. But what we're seeing is an explosion of what is deemed to be a private school because Indiana has no quality guardrails or definition of what that looks like. So literally, they're in the back of food trucks, they're in empty buildings with no heat, no books, no teachers, and they're getting a money grab. So the program in itself needs reviewed, it needs paused, it needs some quality guardrails put on it if we're indeed going to stay in that direction.
Thank you so much for your answer and your thoughtfulness on that one. Destiny, I have a question for you. Hoosiers have a reputation for being frugal. Do you have any concern about the tens of thousands of tax dollars that the current Attorney General is spending to defend himself against accusations of professional misconduct?
Yeah, I mean, frugality has multiple ways that it affects the political space, whether it be from a campaign to then how you conduct yourself when you are the elected official. So I will say, you know, I had kind of referenced this earlier. I think Jennifer, you had just jumped on when we tested about taxpayer waste and fraud, and that issue really resonates with Hoosiers, right? We have a lot of hardworking middle class Hoosiers that want to see that their elected officials also have to earn their way there, right? They don't like that they are necessarily taking their tax dollars to defend things like ethics complaints. Um, on the other hand, the frugality kind of it hurts us as running as Democrats in Indiana because it is such an uphill climb to build a machine that you can successfully run for office and then actually conduct the office on those values, right? So if you want frugal people to run a frugal office, it really becomes difficult. And, you know, I was just on the phone this past week from a representative from Citizens United Now. And we had this conversation, and I said, until everybody in the US takes states like Indiana seriously, these bad ideas are going to continue to come out of places like Indiana because Citizens United was a brainchild of Jim Bob, right? And it has flooded money and dark money into politics so that when you see these politicians get into office, they then have these conflicts of interest. One, whether they've taken money, two, because our inspector general's office has totally been defanged by the supermajority Republican legislature. Three, there's not a cooling off period for folks. That's why we're talking about the Medicaid fraud issue and looking at the leadership and how they've cycled through that office back from public to private to public sector. So it is a huge issue, and I find it's one that's hard for the frugal leaders to wrap their arms around. It really is.
Thank you so much for that answer. Next, we'll go back to Jennifer. A question that goes to women's reproductive health, among other issues. If you're elected, you'll have to work with a legislature that certainly will have a Republican majority. 2 years ago, that majority rushed to pass one of the nation's most restrictive laws on abortion. How do you propose to find common ground with Republican lawmakers, especially on that divisive issue?
Yeah, I also just want to, before I address that, I want to jump into the fiscal responsibility. When I was a Republican elected at the Statehouse, I was actually shocked, appalled, frustrated, you name it, at the waste and the lack of willingness to police themselves as a party. And boy, there are some easy low-hanging fruit if Destiny and I get in to capture dollars back. And we're not talking a little dollars, we're talking tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that I had a lot of question about, that we need to have the right leadership to police it and to make sure that that is reined back in. So having mentioned that, which is incredibly important, on the women's women's reproductive freedoms issue, obviously we don't have ballot initiatives, which would be amazing in the state of Indiana, that a lot of Hoosiers are wanting to have our voice heard, looking at every avenue we can take to, from the governor's, beyond the platform, but from the governor's office, to see if we can push that needle a little further in that would be a good step. Also, the appointments of boards and commissions and agencies that address this space, in particular, the board that reviews the medical licensing once, Todd Rokita decides he's going to go after our medical providers, our healthcare providers, and knowing that that board is not going to jump in on that and chase away great healthcare providers that we're trying to attract and retain, because at this point it's counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish in the state of Indiana. But really for me, it's about using that platform to inform, using every mechanism we can with the boards, the commissions, executive orders, agency heads and agency operations. But also too, I picked a lieutenant governor, first of all, that had character, that also was inclusive of all Hoosiers and had been at the Statehouse and worked across the aisle with many of the people who are still there. So he has a relationship with them, and many of the good relationships. And so utilizing that and making sure that we're being smart about reaching across that aisle. I mean, I know we can find some common ground, and we're really going to work hard to do that.
Thank you so much. This next question is for both of you. Gun violence kills more children and teenagers in Indiana than any other cause of death, including traffic accidents. So first parter, Destiny, as Attorney General, what would you do to curb gun violence, especially to reduce harm to our young people? And then Jennifer, if you want to pop in right after, what would you do as governor about gun violence?
Yeah, so what people don't necessarily know unless you live in the region is that there is a really important case that's being watched by the national audience, and that's the Gary Gun case. The Gary Gun case is where the municipality has been suing the gun manufacturers because of illegal gun sales. We hear this all the time, right, from our counterparts across the border in Chicago and Illinois, that guns come out of Indiana from illegal gun sales. And so Gary was trying to do something about it, and they have been for a couple of decades. This has been very, very long litigation. And so they were able to use the discovery process to start to collect evidence from these gun manufacturers and cost the gun manufacturers some money. So what happened? Well, the Indiana Attorney General went and, talked to the legislature, and all of a sudden the supermajority legislature this past session passes a bill that says that municipalities can no longer sue gun manufacturers, only the Attorney General can. And while that was in motion, the Attorney General was on the trail saying that he was going to make sure that he protected the gun companies. And so what we saw just the last month was that the Attorney General tried to have that case dismissed. And he talks about winning a lot. He never does talk about when he loses. And that motion to dismiss was denied. So I have been on the horn with BradyUnited.org and other people who are invested in this case, wanting to see it continue to move forward. That is where Indiana can do some really great things, where we can finally start to hold gun manufacturers accountable for these illegal sales. So that is something that I want to take the mantle up for as Attorney General. And I have been on the horn, like I said, with the lawyers on this case to make sure that we can get that done come November.
Yeah, and so the gun violence issue at the Statehouse is obviously not a new conversation, and it's not going to be solved this next session. But what I will say is I think there are a lot of common sense gun violence prevention measures that could be implemented, that there is a bipartisan willingness to look at. Safe storage, making our red flags stronger. Now, my opponent's ticket has mentioned that he does not want the red flag law any longer. My opponent's ticket has also mentioned that they like their guns untraceable and undocumented. So we're up against people who are looking at things, again, more extreme. People, Hoosiers that I talk to are very much supportive of the common sense gun violence prevention measures, whether that's age, whether that's furthering that red flag law, whether that is reversal of permitless carry, the list goes on, that we can try to make some steps at that and find some common ground. When I was a state superintendent, we had 2 shootings at schools here in Indiana. And the first couple calls I got were not, what do we need? It was, how do I show up on the scene? And I was like, bad idea. They're in crisis, but it was about getting in front of that camera. And so the intent is, making sure that we are focused on the resources that are that Hoosiers need across the board, making sure people are informed and how to use the laws that are established. We were making some great headway through the state agencies. We didn't do a lot of interagency communications because it was not encouraged or welcomed. But as the new governor, I will certainly do that and find some common ground on how do we provide education to where it needs to go. How do we work with our law enforcement officers in getting that done at the local level? But there are a lot of things we can do without those laws passing, but you have to have agency heads and you have to have a governor who's willing to take that step into pushing that out into Indiana. But certainly working with our General Assembly to try to find some common ground. If we've learned anything in the last few sessions, several sessions, it is there is a willingness there. It gets stopped by a small group of people, but they got a lot of power, and that goes back to that one party rule.
Thank you so much. And for all of you who are still with us, we're so glad to have you. If you had a question, please get it in here. We're going to wrap up this portion of the conversation here and after just another question or two. But if you have a question, we'd love to know what it is. So I will take this question back to you, Jennifer. A big national issue overshadowing many races this year is immigration. To what extent is immigration a problem here in Indiana, and what ways does it benefit our state? And what would you do as governor about immigration?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about immigration. Obviously, illegal immigration, is a federal issue that we need some solutions. And unfortunately, Mike Braun voted no against a very bipartisan bill that would have taken great steps. And even the Border Patrol, supported it. So that's disappointing. But for us, obviously, illegal immigration, we need that federal action on that. We also need to make sure as governor, I am a good partner and very cooperative with how do we keep Indiana safe, but what are the resources needed if necessary for that illegal immigration part. But as far as Indiana goes, a lot of legal immigration has been a huge part of who we are. 6% of our population, a big chunk of our workforce. We have $4.6 billion in tax revenue coming in because of a lot of our immigrants who are here. So making sure that they feel safe and welcomed and that they have an avenue to be part of our communities. A big piece of that, though, is making sure from the state lens that we're getting resources in a faster, less red tape way to our schools and our hospitals who are telling us those who are seeing the populations change a little faster in this space, like they need more resources. They need it into their schools, they need it in their hospitals, they're looking at different things on fair lending and their housing. So how are we smart with that? But clearly the illegal piece of this, we will be a good partner, but we need federal support.
Thank you so much. I got a question. I would just ask to make it kind of plain for everyone that's here. Destiny, many Hoosiers are not necessarily clear on what the job of the Attorney General is. How would you define it?
Yeah, I like to break it into 3 buckets, right? And I referenced these earlier. So 1, you are the government's attorney, right? If the governor needs represented in litigation, if the executive agencies need represented, that was a job I used to do. I would represent the Indiana Department of Correction. You represent them. The second bucket is for being the people's attorney, right? Consumer protection is a big one. That's why you see cases like Todd Rokita taking against Google, like the big tech companies, because 1, it's we shouldn't be in those ones, but we can be in cases where we think consumers are being defrauded. I want to expand that to also workers' rights and have the first workers' rights task force, where we're also doing things like wage theft, worker misclass, issues that other states are covering down on and Indiana is not. The third bucket is advising the legislature. So if the legislature wants to maybe pass, like draft a law, put a law up that they think has constitutional issues, they will ask the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General will then advise them and give a legal opinion. So those are the three buckets, right? It is the state agency's attorney, it is the people's attorney, and then it is the advisory council for the legislature.
Thank you so much. Just had to ask that question because I want to make sure that everyone leaves here understanding what your job actually would be should you be elected. Jennifer, one of our last questions that we'll ask for you, we have this one coming from our audience. Indiana is 42nd out of 50 states in terms of access to mental health services. How will Governor McCormick address this issue?
Yeah, so it's very complex. I mean, the first piece of that is making sure we have an environment here that is friendly to those healthcare providers and acknowledging the crisis that it is. So we have such a lack of healthcare providers. We have such a lack of beds. You know, if someone needs, residential treatment, it is just really hard to get access to that. Our Medicaid needs to be revisited on the services that are or are not granted through the Medicaid process, but also we have a Medicaid mess right now that needs a lot of answers to it regarding the funding, which goes back to, to have honest answers that are transparent. We need a balance. We need to bring back that balance at the Statehouse. So the Medicaid piece of this is huge. Getting the providers we need is huge. Also, too, taking a look at the cross agencies. A lot of people touch on mental health and how do we work together in order to get those services better, efficient and effective as well. But, a lot of that at the local lens also has to be a partner and bringing the right people to the table to come up with solutions that are needed.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you both for such a thoughtful conversation that we've been able to have tonight. Of course, I have many more questions, but we could not get to them within the full hour. So while you have all shared questions with us here, we've also placed in the chat the links directly to connect with their campaigns. Please ask their questions. Please engage. Please continue to connect and share what you've learned here this evening. And at this time, I'd like to give you both a minute or two just to give us some closing statements. We'll begin with you, Destiny.
This is a bit preaching to the choir audience. But I want to tell you, so what do you say to an audience like this? And I've been doing enough of these that I finally have come up with the answer that I need you all to get more comfortable being uncomfortable. And what does that mean? That means having conversations in maybe spaces you didn't think that you'd bring up politics, maybe asking questions of your loved ones, maybe volunteering some time to phone bank. And I have been telling folks just how uncomfortable I've been lately. I was talking to my mother tonight, and I said that I just did not foresee that this race would become so much of almost, it seems like, a feminist type race where I am trying to relay to Hoosiers that the supermajority and the Attorney General and basically the whole slate of Republican statewide candidates this year are after women's rights. And it's not just about abortion. I served in Afghanistan. I saw the worst of it. And what it taught me was that women's rights really are the barometer of a healthy democracy. And when you chip away at women's rights, so goes the democracy. That's something that somebody like ReCenter Indiana and the folks who are here, I hope, can agree on. And so those are the conversations that I need you to start being uncomfortable with having directly with the people that you care about, the people that you think can be influenced to vote us into office this next month.
Thank you both, and thank you all for joining us this evening. On behalf of my colleagues at ReCenter Indiana, our thanks to both Jennifer McCormick and Destiny Wells, and to all of you for joining us this evening. We at ReCenter Indiana would welcome your support. We would appreciate your donation tonight to help us recenter Indiana government. Most importantly, if you have not already done so, please make sure you're registered to vote and that you make plans to vote. Early voting begins on October 8th. Election day is Tuesday, November 5th. For now, I'm Adrienne Slash. Good night.